Okay, we'll take a couple of questions. So they want to continue. Any questions? Johnny? Joe.
Well, yeah, let's end John.
I was just going to ask you about the concept of repetition. Did it enter your head at all? That it's an interesting series of. I was going to ask Jonathan about repetition, the idea of repetition. Did you think of that as a concept when you were working, or did you simply have in your mind the previous projects that had been done?
In repetition of Frank's
Well,
images?
yeah, Frank's images, but also any others that came up, that you gave a juxtaposition of the three, or at least two trajectories that were coming along.
I mean, actually,
Did it
you mean the
then
Michigan
produce a
work?
kind of philosophical reflection at all about repetition, the notion of repetition?
I don't know that was hugely on my mind. No, I mean, Henner's work I didn't see until I'd pretty much finished my own project. So that idea of it bifurcating was simply because of, listening to the presentation. But I did start with the idea of repeating his images. So initially I went to places where his images had been taken and spent a long time waiting for something to appear that would be interesting. So, I took lots and lots of images that ended with the little Muslim family, none of which I was really particularly.
So were you after a representational image, an iconic image of some sort? How did you discriminate?
Not iconic at all, personal, The real thing behind it was that, having studied Frank and written academically on him, I wanted to... I didn't feel that I'd got far enough with it. Having studied it and then written about it, the book was pretty reasonably well received. I didn't feel I'd really got into the heart of the work, and I felt that somehow doing that thing of repeating that kind of journey alone would get me into the work, that I'd feel like a connection with it that I hadn't had before, which is, I learned so much about the work by going to those places. But I very quickly stopped producing images in the same places, because it didn't clearly matter to Frank where he took his picture. It was the moment that was significant. So then I started to look for analogous moments, or not so much look, but just photograph things, and then, if something was there, it would appear. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to turn to Wendy's discussion. I think it kind of threads in the three of you, but also some of the work that was being discussed this morning, particularly in Darren's work. And anyway, and the question is around this. I thought it was a fantastic way that you were developing this question of the uncanny, which I've had a very severe allergic reaction to my entire life, because I just have. But this was the first time that I could see it kind of playing out in a way that allowed for this odd connection that often is just assumed not to be the case in anything that's digital, and that it does take one back to, let's say, the beginning, the eternal return of the beginning of the birth of photography, or something like that. I found that very interesting. So I wanted to know if you had any thoughts, any further developed thoughts, on this relationship between the question of latent image that Daniel was developing, the question of what I was trying to deal with, which was this question of immediacy, how the immediacy is the place where the senses come in, and what sort of Darren was developing. Sorry to bring in another talk in the morning, but anyway, we didn't have a chance to ask a question about how the difference between the kind of images I thought Darren was showing and Jonathan's was that in some of the ones that Jonathan was showing, not all of them, but some of the ones, they seemed to already know what the story was somehow. Whereas in Darren's images, they were quite open. They had something about them that you didn't know what the whole thing was. There was something that kept living in this photograph that refused to go away. And I found that quite, I don't know if the word uncanny is the correct word, because like I said, I have an allergic reaction to the word generally, but I want to see if you try that on.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, I must admit, sort of, last night I was saying to Daniel, I couldn't sleep thinking about these Strindberg sort of images again. I find them really very, very affecting. And sort of trying to sort of understand why that is, for me, is my kind of project. Sort of constantly trying to sort of create in your work, sort of look at this effect and think about why. I mean, in my home, I was saying to you yesterday, in my home, I've got this image up of Hurley's photograph from the Shackleton expedition of the men pulling the James Caird, which for me is just an incredible image. And trying to work out why that idea of latency is so important, and has been really important in a way since the birth of photography, but its importance is changed and shifted, and try to sort of address that in the presentation. I mean, I take your point about this idea of unheimlich. Well, it was something that was kind of in a way forced upon me by people writing about the early work, and then it was only a few months ago when somebody came to me and said, we're doing this at Forum that's called Uncanny Visions, and I thought, oh, Uncanny Visions, in the 1990s. I really... But then the more I thought about it in terms of the algorithm, thinking about what you'd written as well, Daniel, but algorithmic image, I thought it's worth sort of reopening, sort of revisiting that, and sort of continuing to sort of really think about that, now sort of in tandem with this idea of latency. I mean, just to talk about sort of Strindberg images, I mean, this is for me that the way they function, and it's interesting that you compare them to sort of Shackleton, the Hurley photographs, and it's not just because they're about sort of images of sort of very dangerous sort of decided journey. It's also to do, I think, something to do with the kind of sort of snow-covered landscape that turns from negative to positive. A strange thing, the way the figure is completely, utterly overwhelmed by the ground, and then this takes us back to your sort of fascinating sort of paper and scale. And scale plays such a sort of vital part in these works. So, it's true. I'm sorry I'm not very articulate talking about it. I'm just really sort of talking about these ideas as a practitioner, and not necessarily as a sort of theorist, but I do think it's worth again sort of because I think that listening to yesterday's presentation about Instagram, I was really fascinated about how that speaker also sort of talked a bit about his interest in sort of meditation and Buddhism, and I can imagine that after spending 2 years talking about social media for the BBC, you really would have to go to a Buddhist retreat, and I think that these are feelings that are being echoed sort of across the room, and sort of looking at this and trying to sort of unpick it is really, really important. I feel it's key as an image maker. It's the things that you have to sort of try to sort of resolve or at least think about in your work, whether that's looking at sort of developments of photography or just figuring out to make something.
I just wanted to throw in one suggestion that perhaps, and then like, perhaps it's just more productive instead of saying that the algorithm is uncanny, to say that the algorithm is monstrous.
I just want to say something about the word algorithm, because Doug started by saying, I have no idea why I'm on this panel that says algorithm. Just for most of you that do not deal in the sciences at all, and therefore the word algorithm looks like a pretty decorative thing with a and a good Scrabble word or something. It actually means the shortest way you can say something. That's what an algorithm is. An algorithm is, it's almost like a nickname. And what you were doing was in a systematic way. So it's a systemizing of the shortest way you can say something. That's what an algorithm is.
Thank you. Is this on? I really enjoyed Wendy's paper, and I've got another couple of questions for you. Completely different, I think. One is the uncanny valley. It's always irritated me. Isn't it completely antithetical? How can you possibly map the uncanny?
I mean, yes. I mean, it's also been disproved. It simply doesn't function.
Great.
But I think that the reason I used it was that it is cited again and again.
People like to have a map.
Exactly. And I think that it was hilarious at this event, Uncanny Visions, because out of the 3 presenters, each person, I think mine didn't work, my slide of the graph, but somebody else had a slide of it anyway because they were showing it, so it got shown. But I think it's I think that it was interesting to see Domenico Quaranta again sort of cite the uncanny valley curve, because I mean it was first coined by Mori in 1970, and it was for a long time sort of considered really sort of key in the development of humanoid robotics. I mean, and then now things are so much more sophisticated. So I think I just used it as kind of an interesting sort of historical sort of counterpoint.
Yeah.
Not using it as evidence. Yeah.
The other thing was more directly about your work. You show one of the images that I most like in the range of work that you've done, specifically the one of the little girl partially reflected in the taxidermy case with I think it's bears behind the screen, but she's on both sides. And I'm wondering whether this is uncanny, in fact, even though it's got reflection and doubling, and is she human or is she on the side of the animal troped there? Because it's her curiosity that it is not necessarily anything to do with anxiety.
I think. Yes, I mean, I think for me, it's my experience of that as a child, because a lot of the places that I go to photograph are places that I have memories of, or have constructed these sort of memories of, because they're museums that were local to me. And I remember that one, certainly, that anxiety was a huge part of the experience. I mean, these objects, the grizzly bear is 8-9 foot high. I mean, and I just find it very interesting that you can kind of put your toe into that real kind of sort of bowel ripping kind of experience, but safely. Because I mean, you stand in front of the object, there is a lot of anxiety, and I think you do kind of feel that. And I tried to, that's what I wanted to sort of look at or work with.
We can take one more question.
Just one back.
While you were discussing the possibility or impossibility of mapping the uncanny, something occurred to me that was linking the last 2 presentations. I was thinking of the following Robert Frank photographs as using them as a map for the United States. Now, obviously, it's not a map that is built along axes, and is not a bird view from above that sees the landscape in one take. It's actually a known straight line, if it is a line. I don't know if you follow them in the same order, actually, but it might almost be a pattern, because you were already referring to previous images. Now, what just came to my mind is that, is it possible not to map, but to attempt to cross the uncanny with mapping methods that are more patterns rather than laying out entire descriptions of it? And when I say patterns in this case, I think very much in the case of photography, I think of modes of behaving rather than straightforward knowledge accumulated and stored. Thank you.
Just a brief response to that, if that's okay. Frank himself, much later, after the work had become very celebrated, said that when he returned from taking the photographs, he knew that he had something, but he didn't know that he had America. So in a sense, almost a kind of a thread that runs through criticism and appreciation of Frank's work is that essentially he captured a truer picture or a truer map of America than anyone else had up until that point, and that's what makes it powerful. I mean, in terms of the uncanny, I think following that kind of journey really is, it's about trying to come into direct contact with yourself, and using that as a tool, an enabling tool. The project as an enabling tool to meet up with yourself. So that's relevant to it.